Donald Trump mocked Volodymyr Zelenskyy behind closed doors. Keir Starmer took a stand that shocked the world. And just when everyone thought they knew the truth, a secret deal was exposed that turned everything upside down. This isn't just politics. This is a global power shift unfolding before our eyes. And trust me, you won't believe how it ends. The room was ice cold, not from the temperature, but from the tension. Inside the White House, the Oval Office felt more like a battlefield. Zelensky sat across from Trump, his hands clasped tightly together, his face unreadable. Cameras weren't allowed in this room, but if they were, the entire world would see it, the quiet hostility simmering just beneath the surface. Trump leaned back in his chair, eyes locked onto Zelensky. Then, in his signature blunt tone, he dropped the bombshell. "You've failed. Maybe it's time we rethink our arrangement." A heavy silence followed. Zelensky blinked. He had anticipated tension, but this was outright humiliation. The two leaders had clashed before, but this was different. It wasn't just a disagreement. It wasn't just another tough negotiation. It was a public dressing down, and Trump wanted him to feel it. Zelensky's jaw tightened. He leaned forward slightly, choosing his words carefully. "Mr. President, if Ukraine falls, the consequences will be global. You know that," Trump smirked. "That's not my problem, is it?" Then, without another word, he stood up and walked out. Zelensky barely had time to process what had just happened. Had the President of the United States just walked out on him? The door slammed shut. The meeting was over. The cameras outside flashed like a wildfire as Zelensky emerged from the White House, his face a mix of anger, disbelief, and determination. But behind the scenes, something far bigger was about to unfold. Hours later, a classified report leaked to the press. Trump had ordered Zelensky out. This wasn't just political friction anymore. This was an outright international humiliation. And watching it all unfold from his office in London was Keir Starmer. Starmer's face was unreadable as the headlines flashed across the screen. "Zelensky snubbed by Trump. Is U.S. support over?" For a moment, he just watched. Then, slowly, he turned to his aide and said, "Get me Zelensky." Privately. Because what he was about to do would change everything. The engines of the private jet hummed softly, slicing through the black sky over the Atlantic. Inside, Zelensky sat alone, staring at the dimly lit cabin wall, his mind racing. He had been on hundreds of flights before, but this one felt different. It wasn't just about war anymore. It was about survival. His hands clenched into fists. Hours ago, he had been sitting across from Trump. Now, he was heading straight into a secret meeting with Keir Starmer. No press, no official statements, just two leaders caught in the middle of a global storm, trying to navigate what could be the biggest political shift in modern history. He leaned back in his seat, eyes flickering shut for a brief moment. The White House humiliation still burned inside him. Trump had made a statement. Now, it was time to make his own. 2:47 a.m., London Heathrow Airport. The private jet landed smoothly on the empty runway. No flashing cameras, no motorcade, just silence. The door opened, and Zelensky stepped onto British soil. Waiting at the base of the stairs was a black Range Rover. No words were spoken as he climbed inside. The door shut, and the convoy rolled forward into the cold, misty streets of London. Destination, 10 Downing Street. But despite the secrecy, they weren't alone. Somewhere in the shadows, someone was watching. Inside 10 Downing Street, Keir Starmer sat at the long wooden table, his fingers lightly tapping against its surface. The room was dimly lit, files scattered across the polished wood. Behind him, the TV screen flashed. "Zelensky, why humiliated in White House? U.S. alliance fracturing." His jaw tightened. This was bigger than politics. A soft knock. The door opened. Zelensky stepped inside. For a moment, neither man spoke. Then finally, Starmer exhaled and gestured to the seat across from him. "You've had quite the day." A small, humorless smile played on Zelensky's lips. "You could say that." He lowered himself into the chair, resting his arms on the table. Then, in a low, measured voice, he asked, "Tell me, Keir, where does the UK really stand?" Starmer studied him carefully. Then, after a beat, he leaned forward. "That depends. How far are you willing to go?" Starmer didn't sugarcoat it. Trump's actions had rattled NATO. If the US continued pulling back, it would leave Europe more vulnerable than ever before. But what if Europe didn't need to rely on America anymore? He let the words settle before continuing. There's been talk, quiet talk, about a European defense pact, one that doesn't rely on Washington. Zelensky's eyes flickered with intrigue. A defense pact without the US? That would be historic. Starmer nodded. It would change the balance of power forever. For the first time that night, Zelensky's lips curved into a small, knowing smirk. Then let's talk. And just like that, the foundation of a new global alliance was laid. But secrets never stay hidden for long. Somewhere in Washington, a single email landed in the inbox of a top U.S. intelligence officer. The subject line? Zelenskyy and Starmer. Secret talks confirmed. And within hours, the world would know everything. It was just another evening in Washington. The evening news anchors in their polished suits, sitting in front of their shiny desks, were ready to close the show. The usual routine. Then it happened. A low-level government contractor, someone barely even noticed in the vast machine of Washington politics, pressed send. The footage landed. It was a security camera clip, one that had been recorded the moment Trump had finished his meeting with Zelenskyy. The clip showed Trump alone, standing by the window in the Oval Office, visibly agitated. He spoke to an unseen aide on the other end of the line, his voice dripping with disdain. Zelenskyy, what a joke. He chuckled darkly. He couldn't even lead a parade, let alone a country. The guy's weak, and everyone knows it. But they'll follow him. They have no choice. His voice grew louder, his irritation boiling over as he mocked Zelenskyy's leadership. Then, without hesitation, he continued. I've given him everything. He can't even hold up his end of the deal. The rest of the world sees it, but they're too afraid to say it. It was an unguarded, brutal moment of truth, and someone had just leaked it. By morning, the footage had gone viral. It was everywhere. On Twitter, it spread like wildfire. Within hours, hashtags like #Trump mocking Zelenskyy and #weak leader dominated global headlines. International news outlets from London to Berlin to Tokyo ran the footage on repeat. Trump's raw, unfiltered words echoed through every corner of the world. And just like that, the media frenzy began. The White House had become the center of a political earthquake, and there was no way to stop the tremors. Damage control mode kicked into overdrive. Press conferences, denials, and explanations filled the airwaves, but it didn't matter. The damage had already been done. Zelenskyy's public humiliation had been laid bare for the world to see. But the real question remained. What would he do now? Would he back down? Would he play by Trump's rules? As the flames of backlash rose higher and higher, the British Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, had a choice to make. He could stay silent. He could play it safe and allow the storm to rage in Washington, hoping it would pass. But Starmer wasn't the kind of leader to sit on the sidelines. This ends now. Those were the first words he spoke in the press briefing that day. The cameras flashed as Starmer walked up to the podium, his demeanor calm, but his words were sharp. What we saw yesterday was a blatant and disgusting attack on a leader who was fighting for his country's survival. Zelenskyy has shown resilience that should be admired, not mocked. He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle. If the White House cannot show respect for leaders like Zelenskyy, then we will. The UK will stand with Ukraine, no matter what. And just like that, Starmer drew a line in the sand, a bold, historic move that sent a message to the world. The UK was no longer on the sidelines. Starmer wasn't just backing a fellow leader, he was standing up for what was right. He was defending a man who had shown the world what true leadership meant in the face of unimaginable odds. But Trump's inner circle was in full-blown chaos. White House staff scrambled to control the damage, but it was too late. Their phones buzzed off the hook, filled with calls from not just the press, but other world leaders, all wondering how the U.S. could recover from this. Trump's own allies began to distance themselves. Some even quietly whispered that Trump's actions were beginning to hurt America's standing on the global stage. One top Republican senator publicly called for a meeting with Trump. But the mood in Washington was shifting. Allies of Trump were starting to turn, realizing they could no longer defend him. And in Europe, the lines were drawn. Germany's chancellor, France's president, and several other European leaders made public statements of support for Zelenskyy. They praised the Ukrainian leader's courage and fortitude in the face of adversity. One European diplomat said it best: "If the United States cannot show respect for its allies, then we will." The fallout from the leaked footage wasn't just shaking Washington. It was sending shockwaves through global alliances. Across the Atlantic, U.S. allies were quietly asking themselves, was this really the man they could continue to back? Canada, once a loyal partner, began questioning its role in the growing divide between Trump's administration and the international community. Talks began about the future of NAFTA, with some members hinting that they might have to realign their trade agreements if Washington didn't return to a more cooperative stance. In South Korea, President Moon Jae-in called an emergency session with his defense ministers. How much can we trust Trump's word on defense matters now? The very foundations of these alliances were cracking under the pressure of Trump's political turmoil. For the first time, Trump's own closest allies began to wonder if the global stage could still be his domain, or if he had outplayed his hand. Inside the halls of the U.S. Senate, whispers spread like wildfire. Leading Republican senators gathered in closed-door meetings asking, do we need to distance ourselves from him? The world was watching, and the cracks were widening. While the U.S. scrambled to maintain its global position, Zelenskyy was already securing his next move. Behind closed doors in the dimly lit war room of the Ukrainian embassy in London, Zelenskyy paced, his mind turning rapidly. He had faced humiliation, but now he was ready to turn the tables. The initial meeting with Keir Starmer had been the first step, but Zelenskyy's true genius lay in the plan he was quietly crafting. He had already spoken to European leaders, each private conversation sowing the seeds of a new European defense pact. But this wasn't just about military alliances. Zelenskyy understood one truth that many others overlooked: the economy drives power. He knew that in order to break free from the grip of global powers, Ukraine needed to create its own influence, an influence rooted in trade, technology, and energy. His eyes flicked over the map of Eastern Europe laid out before him, each line a potential border in this new world order. With Starmer's backing, Zelenskyy could forge economic ties with the UK and Germany in ways that would make them indispensable to each other. But there was one critical piece he was still missing: Russia. Zelenskyy needed to outsmart Moscow and, in turn, gain the upper hand. And that's when it hit him. A surprise energy deal with European nations could shift everything, undermining Russia's dominance over Europe's energy supply. This wasn't just a war for land anymore. It was a war for control of resources. And Zelenskyy intended to take the fight straight to the economic heart of Russia. But this plan wasn't going to be simple. As Zelenskyy's plan took shape, something dark was lurking just beneath the surface. It started small, a rumor here, a whisper there. But soon a confidential detail from the Starmer-Zelenskyy meeting was made public. The leak wasn't random. It was targeted. And it came from inside the UK government. Starmer was furious. He stormed through the corridors of Downing Street, his usually calm demeanor shattered. "Who leaked this?" he demanded, his voice low and dangerous. His advisors were at a loss. The leak had come from someone close, but who? In the days that followed, an atmosphere of suspicion gripped Downing Street. There were murmurs that powerful figures within the government, who didn't agree with Starmer's hardline stance on Zelenskyy, had thrown him under the bus. A traitor? The thought gnawed at Starmer, his mind racing with the possibilities. Could this betrayal come from within his own team? The question wasn't just about who leaked it. It was about why. As the days wore on, it became clear that something far larger was at play. The leak, the whispers of betrayal, the power shifts, they weren't random acts. Behind the scenes, unseen forces were moving the pieces. Powerful elite group, long suspected of pulling the strings behind global politics, was tightening its grip on events. These were the invisible hands that had made and unmade governments, corporations, and economies for decades. They had already weakened Trump, and now they were setting their sights on the new target, Zelenskyy. Zelenskyy, for all his plans and ambitions, was becoming an obstacle to the global elites who still wanted to keep the world's balance in their hands. His move against Russia, his alliance with Starmer, and his bold vision for European independence were too dangerous for the old power structures. A secret group, headquartered in the heart of Europe, began working tirelessly to sabotage Zelenskyy's efforts. Mysterious back-channel deals, manipulated media reports, and disinformation campaigns flooded the airwaves. Who were these forces? What did they want? And most importantly, could anyone stop them? The United Nations General Assembly in New York had never felt this charged. The atmosphere inside the hall was thick with anticipation. The delegates from around the world were seated, their attention locked on the three most powerful figures in the room: Donald Trump, Volodymyr Zelenskyy, and Keir Starmer. Today wasn't about policy or protocol. This was personal. Trump, Zelenskyy, and Starmer had never been in the same room together before, and the weight of the moment was undeniable. The world was waiting to see how it would unfold. The cameras flashed, the media scribbled furiously. The tension in the room was palpable. Trump took the stage first, his expression firm, his posture defiant. He addressed the assembly with his usual brash confidence. "I've always said this. The world needs to respect the United States. We are the greatest force for good in the world. Anyone who doubts that is making a mistake." He paused, eyes scanning the room. "But that's not what we're talking about today, is it? Today we're here to discuss the future of Europe, and more importantly, the future of Ukraine." A murmur rippled through the room. Zelenskyy, standing on the opposite side of the stage, could feel his pulse quicken. Zelenskyy stepped forward, his voice calm but unwavering. "The future of Ukraine is not for any one leader to decide. The people of Ukraine deserve peace, prosperity, and independence without the interference of those who only wish to see us fail. I'm not here to fight against America, Mr. Trump. I'm here to fight for my people." The room held its breath. The tension was electric as the two men stood on opposite sides of the global stage. Their faces were lit by the harsh lights of the cameras, their words carrying the weight of their nations. Then Keir Starmer made his move. He was calm but resolute as he approached the podium. "What you've heard today is a story of power, of manipulation, and of global politics. But what you're about to hear is something far more important. What you're about to hear is the truth." Starmer's voice rang out across the room, drawing all eyes to him. "What we've seen over the last few weeks is a battle for the soul of the world. Do we allow the powerful to manipulate the weak, or do we stand up for what is right? For justice? For peace?" The world waited. For the first time, the three of them were not just fighting for power, they were fighting for something much greater: the future of the world. Just as the atmosphere was thick with anticipation, a shocking revelation shattered the silence. A brief, unexpected interruption came from the back of the hall. A security officer stepped forward, carrying a sealed envelope. The camera zoomed in as the officer handed the envelope to the UN Secretary General. The room was tense. What was this? The Secretary General opened the envelope and looked at the crowd with wide eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen, it seems we have some new information." The world gasped as the next few words were read aloud. "This document contains a secret agreement between the United States and Russia, signed just days before the UN summit. The deal outlines a strategy to undermine Zelenskyy's leadership and solidify Russia's control over Eastern Europe." The crowd erupted in shock. Zelenskyy's eyes widened as the weight of the revelation settled in. The betrayal was far deeper than anyone had anticipated. The forces at play were no longer just political, they were global. Trump stood frozen. He had been caught in a web of lies he couldn't deny. The documents were real, and the proof was irrefutable. Zelenskyy turned to Starmer, who nodded subtly in his direction. This was it. The moment of reckoning. The world was forever changed by the events that transpired that day. What had begun as a political battle between three leaders had turned into something far bigger: a lesson in integrity and leadership. the shocking twist revealed the depths of political manipulation that had been taking place behind the scenes. But it also revealed something else: the strength of standing up for what is right, no matter the cost. Zelensky had fought for Ukraine's independence not for personal gain, but for the future of his people. He had shown the world that true leadership wasn't about power. It was about courage, conviction, and a willingness to face the truth, no matter how ugly it may be. Starmer had stood by his values, even when it meant going against his own allies. His bold stance showed the world that integrity and honor still matter in a world full of corruption and deceit. And Trump? His downfall was a reminder that no leader, no matter how powerful, can escape the truth forever. Power without integrity is fragile, and the world would not stand by idly while those who wielded it sought to undermine the future of nations. Now it's your turn. If you think leaders should stand against corruption, hit the like button. And tell us, who do you think was really in the right? Was it Zelensky's fight for his people, Starmer's stand for integrity, or Trump's pursuit of power? Let us know in the comments below. And if you believe in standing for what's right, share this video, because the world needs more leaders like Zelensky, Starmer, and the ones who choose courage over convenience.